Hello, my friends. Hope you had a fantastic day or night wherever you are. Today, I'm going to be interviewing Joe, talking about all things video, why you should do it, how you should do it, and why you can use your phone just to get started, and how you can continue to articulate your message to your ideal client, and what problems and how you should be even thinking about creating video in 2024. So thank you ever so much for coming back and joining me. If you did enjoy this episode and would like to see more like it, make sure to be subscribed. I'll see you in just a moment's time for this incredible interview. See you in a sec.
Yeah. Hi. So I'm Joe. I'm from Sway. I'm the co-founder, and we help B2B marketing and content teams start with video and then scale it up.
I really appreciate the time, and I think there's so many people who are talking about video right now, as we alluded to in our pre-show conversation. And I'm cautious with the words I use here because I don't want to directly piss anyone off. But I think there's a lot of people who are flying the flag without doing the walk first. Would that be a fair point?
Oh, definitely.
And what would you say to like the consumers and people who are, look, let's be honest, video is only going to get more complicated. Potentially the AI involvement's probably going to happen more, and or the concept of A/B testing, thumbnails and delivery and how you really do those, packaged elements of the content is going to get more complicated. But why, in a nutshell, should people, in your opinion, should use video in a concept as a whole?
So I think I'll take this in a few different layers, because I think you can look at it at a very high level and then it kind of works its way down. So I think at a very high level, I think the way in which, so okay, let's start from the very top. So I think content as a whole is kind of changing. The approach to content is changing, right? We've gone from this world where and still to an extent, if you look at B2B, it's still very search driven content, right? Like
you need a blog post, you need captions that are very that way, you need to target those specific keywords to your business, etc., to gain any traffic, to really have, quote unquote, the right interest connecting with you.
Yes, exactly. And now that what I'm not saying is I'm not advocating for stop doing that, or that world isn't completely dying. I just think we're shifting much more now towards a more of a social first approach, right? Where content strategies now, if you look at like the consumer space, virtually every upstart e-commerce business now is creating some kind of content on top of TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. Like that's now quite a well adopted thing. Whereas in the B2B space, it's a bit of a different story, right? Virtually, I'd say every B2B company is still on the whole, search driven. And so I start there because, the way in which now social platforms are trending, and the way in which social first strategies are trending is it's heavily video driven, right? On top of these social platforms now, what's working really, the formats that are working are video. Again, does text still work? Can you still publish written content? Yes, of course. But if you look at the content that's getting consumed on, well, obviously on TikTok, but also on Instagram, even LinkedIn now, it's all trending in the direction of video, right? So high level, we're transitioning away from a world which is blog first, search driven content first, to now this world which is social first. That's where the majority of consumption on the internet is going, right? It's on these social platforms. And again, that's not necessarily a new thing, but it's new in the from the perspective of B2B.
It's
right?
it's a new in the market that we both, let's be honest, we care about and we serve, right? It's because in most cases, the people we want to talk to are business owners. In most cases, they are people who have are managing directors. They have a message. They have a form of brand they want to showcase, right? And I think when we look at search-driven content, it's important to mention as well that it shouldn't be neglected, as you already alluded to, but especially because every video that you post has to have text alongside it, right? And that actually has, I'm not sure on the weighting at the moment, but in most cases it's probably going to be close to 50-50, if not more, when it comes to your making sure that seed audience, the audience which has served the video first, is correct. Because that's why, in most cases we care about what the search terms are we're looking to really question or really put forward. But also I think it's about, especially as we look into 2024, it's going to be around, does your click through actually get a payoff within the first 5 seconds, as e.g. your hook, and say, hey, yeah, this is the solution. I am providing you what I said I would provide you with, right? The days of kind of clickbait-esque YouTube content doesn't really exist. It doesn't really fly anymore because of autoplay, because of, let's be honest, audiences by proxy, because of how much content has gone online across the last 10 years, are just getting smarter, right? And they have, and they're just like, nah, fuck this, because it's not what I clicked on, right? How many videos, and I'll ask the audience listening, how many videos have you clicked on recently where you have not given it a second thought and just gone, yeah, well, this isn't what I clicked on, bye, I'm going to watch another one, right? And also, I mean, if that is the case, which it sounds like it is, from your perspective as well, how do we combat that as creators? Because I think that is the bit where we're really going to see the difference between people who know how to leverage video and can really make it work for a business, and ones who are maybe not leveraging it as hard as they could, or potentially not doing the service they could be to their business owners.
Yeah, sorry. Can you rephrase the question?
Yeah, of course I can. So the conversation or the question I guess I'm referring to is what role would you say the hook, or how important is that autoplay 5 seconds, especially on YouTube, but TikTok is the same, etc. This golden moment in a start when you get that click from an audience member. How important is it for someone to make sure that click is in line with the overarching strategy for the video itself?
It's massive, right? And I think if you look at most videos, especially YouTube, LinkedIn, most of the videos that B2B SaaS, these the videos that these companies push out, when you look at like the first 5 or 10 seconds, it's such, I always say, me and my co-founder, it's such a wasted opportunity, right? Usually it's like the 5-10 second motion intro where nothing happens, and it's like, I think if you if you digged into the metrics on behind most B2B SaaS YouTube channels, you'd probably see that there's like a crazy massive
there's a massive
right,
audience drop off,
kind of massive drop after that first initial period, and it's because there's no focus put into that first, how do we keep the viewer engaged and kind of make good on our promise that we've done on our thumbnail and our title in that first 5 or 10 seconds. And it's the same on top of LinkedIn, right? I see the mistake happen again and again and again, where even if it's just like a clip from a podcast, right, it's there's no real thought. You can see there's no real thought that's gone into like picking the right specific moment where the speaker says something intriguing and it piques the interest. It's just that isn't there. So I think it's absolutely everything. And as a company, if you're investing a lot into video, this is probably one of the biggest slip ups, biggest mistakes that that you can make, right? It's just not investing properly into that first 5-10 seconds.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, I think it's one of those things that can be overlooked because we are in, quote unquote, this you could call it a gold rush age. Perhaps at the end of that gold rush age, though, in video's a shiny thing that we should all have, right? I mean, you were alluding to a little bit before. We talked about hooks, regarding that larger strategy, and then moving down about why video. So, yes, we've got that search term traffic. Yes, it's going to really help to bring that search term and really help us, with that search terminology when it comes to our social content or YouTube content or website content. But after that, what's that middle stage or the smaller stages that you were going to allude to when it comes to video, and why?
So sorry, in the context.
In the context of it, so before we talked about that, we were talking about the overarching why use video, right? And I think before we get too far into the episode, I want to make sure that people really understand why video is a good idea. So there's the search element, sure, but why else, right?
So I think currently why else right now? I mean, if you look in the last 12 or 18 months, obviously the big thing, and the big elephant in the room right now, obviously, is AI. And I think that alone should be probably the biggest why now do video. Because all that's going to now happen, and is already playing out and is already happening, is all of these AI tools are just making it 10 times easier to not only ideate, but create and then also distribute written content, right, at a much larger and faster scale. So I think what's going to happen and what you'll see play out in the next kind of 12, 18 months is it's search and kind of written content is just going to get so commoditized, right? And everyone's kind of going to have access to the same, level of tools. Everyone's going to be able to quickly spin out a pretty decent, 7, 8 out of 10 quality, blog post. Like that game has kind of been, it's a level playing field, now. And I think for your average startup, it's a very competitive field to be playing in, right? Whereas I think when you go video first and the focus of your content strategy is it's led with video, and you're getting your founders in front of a camera, you're getting experts inside your company in front of a camera, and producing videos. There's just a very different there's a very different reaction from the audience, right? And it's not a game that everyone can play. And it's also not a game that everyone will be bothered to play, right? Everyone is just going to do the easiest thing, which is let's just spin out AI generated written content. So I think it's for me over the next at least 1 or 2 years until, well, maybe AI can, who knows, maybe it becomes so easy that you can just create video content as well. I still think we're a few years away from that, to be honest.
And I think there is always going to be a space for story driven, own written with the effluence around that AI, right? Let's do it really quickly, right? Let's not say that, I personally believe anyway, AI is a tool like anything else is, right? We're seeing it with, Ops Clips, for example. Other AI editors are available, but I'll use Ops Clips as an example because it's the one we use. But, taking that content that could take a lot of time for an editor and turning that time into a short period of time, or even, ways to cut this podcast using AI and elements like that. And you've already alluded to ChatGPT and how it can, kind of, I guess in some ways, create an easier playing field for everyone when it comes to written content. But then I guess the question then becomes well, what's going to stand you apart, right? Could it be, perhaps to some businesses, the fact they're not using AI? But then the question comes is, how do you know that they're not, right? Because this is kind of the to and fro situation. Because I think as AI was this new fun tool to play with, everyone got really hyped up and really happy about it until they realized that this could be quite serious and you needed to continue to develop. Now, continue with evolution of a business and continue to develop and leverage technology is not a new thing for business owners, right? Let's be honest, it's not, right? The internet was an example of it, etc. The concept of, as prices of video cameras, right, the one I'm looking into right now, came down, the barriers to entry when it came to video also came down with it, right? But I think, what would you say then is those standing out principles? Because people could argue, or people might say, that videos also are going to become, as you've already alluded to, a commoditized market, right? Because it's quite cheap in relative terms to do video semi-professionally now, right?
No, it's a really good point. Although I still think there's, I think even though the barrier has come down now, I still think there's still a lot of resistance, to getting on video. And I think purely that fact alone, when I say resistance, I just mean people don't want to get in front of a camera. And I think that will still stop a lot of people, the majority, from doing it, at least initially. But I think for me, those standing out principles in the context of B2B are, I think, really making sure that your content has a very clear point of view, and it's expert driven, right? Now, there's obviously a whole of a genre of video content, which is entertainment kind of driven. And, I'd say entertainment and also story driven, although you can kind of bring those elements into this kind of, expert led content that I'm talking about. But I think, for me, it's really making sure that when you're producing content, you're not kind of just translating that like listicle type SEO content into video, right? Where you're just kind of creating a monologue script, and you're almost just duplicating that very vanilla type SEO content and just translating it into video, which is, I think, probably what some companies are already doing, and that's where they'll start. But I think for me, and what we do with our clients is the focus is really how do we, really extract from, it's usually founders that we work with, or, CEOs, getting them in front of a camera. How do we really extract those unique points of view that they've got, usually across like a long form conversation like this. And really get to like what are their kind of really kind of fiery opinions, right? What are their kind of controversial beliefs about the industry that they're working in, their solution to the problem
I
that
think,
their
yeah,
business.
I think there's a lot of people, and I was having a conversation with a very good friend of mine today about this, about, I think there's a lot of people who are scared to have a view, right, as a whole at the moment, especially, and without necessarily pointing fingers, I think that's natural because we're in a point of contraction and people are scared or worried about, where's the next payment coming from, and am I going to piss off my clients, and etc. But for me and some of the work I'm doing with some of my coaching clients is, questioning what values do you hold and do your clients align with those values, right? And I think if you can find people and work with people, and look, the probability on numbers is ridiculous, right? Even if you're just a UK-based business, we're still talking about 7 million, roughly around 7 million people that you could be working with, right? And the probabilities of you finding the right percentage to work with that all synergize with how you work and what you think is okay and not is probably quite high. You know what I mean? That's quite high. So I think there's a scared culture at the moment, specifically around like, oh, what if I say this thing that could upset X person? But I would go on.
Yeah, and I think that probably speaks to a more of a deeper issue there. Like, and again, when I'm saying controversial beliefs and opinions, I'm not saying you have to go out there and start putting out completely outlandish opinions. It's more just kind of what are the commonly held beliefs within your industry, or maybe another way of saying it is like, what does everyone kind of believe but are just not really saying out loud,
Well, I mean,
right? And it's like it's those things within your industry, right? That are related to your service, and so it's not. I wouldn't say it's about there and just it's not about going out and saying completely outlandish shit, right? It's
No, of
kind
course.
of.
I think, I mean, that does open up a larger question, though, which is around personal branding as a whole, right? Because we've seen, I guess, I don't know what you've seen on LinkedIn, etc., but like for me personally, I've seen this massive uproar in some ways of personal brand's really important. You need to keep doing it. You need to do this, you need to do that. And actually, arguably, it's more important for a personal brand to exist than arguably even a corporate brand in some ways, right? Because every employee has even if you're an employee, you still have a personal brand, and that's what I mean about values. That's to synergize with the overarching view of a company, right? I mean, when it comes to video content and people, because a lot of the audience, I'll be honest with you, are going to consume this, are going to be smaller entrepreneurs, right? They're going to be people who are maybe solo or maybe 1, 2 employees. They're going to probably be in a different ball to than necessarily the founders and CEOs. But I think there's a lot of principles that both of those groups can take into their video content to help it, I guess, in some ways connect more with their target client in that regard, right? And I think that's where personal branding and values come in, because it's not about necessarily saying, oh, I'm going to say this controversial thing within my industry just to cause outroar, right? It's about actually, I think, pushing the boundaries of what's possible and saying, actually, I don't think as an industry we're doing good enough. So have you thought about doing X, right? I mean, to put it, articulate it in a question, what role do you think personal branding has in 2024?
Oh, I think I think again, it will be a trend. It's been a trend and it's been a hot kind of thing all over LinkedIn for like the last 3-4 years, right? And I think the way that you've seen it packaged up by influencers up until now has been kind of this very like become this very like vanilla personality that takes selfies on LinkedIn, and that like talks about very generic topics and things. That's not really personally my perspective on personal branding or how I think you should approach it. I think for me, personal branding is really just like, it's just a way of voicing your expertise, and sharing that with with a group of people. And it's just I think it's something that gives you a leg up, right, in your market, in your industry, and just positions you as someone who possesses a level of expertise around a particular skill, a topic. That's really how I see it. And I think it's, again, going back to the platforms themselves, right? they favor people, not companies, right? And people prefer to follow personalities, not companies, right? And so just by understanding that, it's, you know, I think if you're not prioritizing personal branding from the perspective of just sharing your expertise and doing what you would kind of be doing for your company brand or, you know, your company page, I think you're just missing out quite significantly, because of, you know, when you look at these social platforms, they're all preferring the individual, not the entity and the organization.
No, I completely agree, and I think it's something that so many people need to ask themselves the hard questions around, right? If you're not doing video, you're not thinking about it, why not? And in general, there is, I think, a level of psychological confidence issue in respect to, like, what if this person disagrees with me? What if something goes wrong, etc.? Because a lot of people, when they start video, as we've already alluded to, it's kind of a confidence-based thing from their point of view. And one of the best ways I tackle this with clients and with general is reminding them that they're a catalyst to the information that they need to talk about. It's actually less about them, right? It's not really about them, but it is in the same way. Because yes, you're the voice and yes, you're the face, but actually it's down to the content, the words, the things you're articulating, where the audience is going to gather or going to, you know, gain interest from, but also something else that I'm sure, you know, your audience is aware, but I'll mention it here for the sake of people who aren't. There's a social graph on quite a lot of these platforms, which is those vanity metrics we look at, comments, likes, shares, etc. Then there's interest graphs, mostly popularized on TikTok, where if I like video content that is about video content, I'll be served more about video content. It gets really reception-y, but that's why they're there. I think understanding and not disrespecting the kind of graph we're referring to in regards to the platform we're on is the important element if you want to grow, right? And if you want your content to be seen, because a common issue to an extent can be people go and put content out on LinkedIn and then they go and do the rest of the things they've got to do in a day because we're busy, right? We're business owners. But so, and I'm privy to this as well, right? I am going out of my way this year to build more community around my content and around others as content, which in hope would mean that the social graph as a whole is potentially going to see my content in a more valued light. What would you say to people? Because the thing is, this is where the hurdle comes, I guess, because so many people say it's a large time investment, but what's the return, right? Because you've got to do these comments, you've got to do shares, you've got to build a community, you've got to do all the video content, you've got to add value, all these things we talked about, but what's the return?
Well, the return is I think it a lot of people look at content I think in a very like one-dimensional way, right? Where I post something, I might get a few likes, it might produce a few leads, it might grow my business slightly. Like the way I look at content, and I think the way that certain individuals now are starting to view their own personal brand, right, and their own content, is that it's an entire way of approaching the growth of your entire business, right? Because by consistently posting content on LinkedIn and by consistently sharing stuff, through my profile, not only am I, generating leads and, getting more exposure in my industry, XYZ, the obvious benefits, but I'm also, getting insights from, my target audience, my, future buyers. Like I'm getting a daily feed, of insights, of questions about topics. Is this resonating with my audience? So for me, personal branding and, posting content and, what's the ROI? Well, it's just that I think it allows you to go about building a business in a much more, efficient way. And just it's not just the obvious, well, it might, generate a few leads. It's a much more kind of full picture than that, right? By posting all the time, I'm getting very continuous feedback. I'm learning a lot more, probably 10 to 20x more than my competitors, right? Because I'm getting a daily feed of insights from people, not just on my own content, but by engaging with other people's content, I'm getting insights. So I look at it as like it becomes this like giant insight machine that feeds how I then go and create services. It feeds how, it feeds the entire business, right? So I think, yeah, it's a long-winded answer, but
I
yeah,
think I think there's a really important point that you added there, which is not necessarily always tying the ROI of I made X amount of money, I got this number of inquiries, I got this number of leads to what you're doing necessarily, right? And I had a conversation with a good friend of mine this afternoon, which was you need to make sure you're doing marketing, especially when you're solo and you don't have a lot of money necessarily, to do something you enjoy personally and can add skills and can create a world where you're getting better at your craft, right? Let's like the reason why I have a podcast has got nothing to do with how much money it makes me. It has everything to do with the fact that I become a better interviewer, which in turn means when I go onto set and I'm interviewing a client and trying to help them articulate their value, I can be better at this kind of conversation, which in turn means I'm better on set, right? That was the original reason why I had a podcast, because I launched it during lockdown or just before lockdown, and then it really became really powerful during lockdown, but it allowed me to stay sharp on interviewing. And the question I always ask my clients is not, oh, how did you hear about us? That could be 1,000 different ways, none of which actually matter, to be honest. The important question you should be asking is, what was the thing that made you choose us to purchase? What was the reason why you chose to purchase with us rather than purchasing with the other 15 other videographers who were all making lots of content and were all very shiny and very lovely, right? And that's no offense meant to them. The crux is about asking the client, the person who's buying with you at the time, and something which I've built into my process when we win a job. It's like, okay, great, on that project review stage at the end, how did you actually hear about us? What actually was the tipping point? Was it a piece of content? Was it a blog post? Was it a website, etc.? Because I think that's a more important question to ask than how did you initially hear about us? Because how did you initially hear about us? What does that tell you? What, that someone went into your world and that someone's now consuming your content? That, like, they could be in your content forever. It doesn't mean that they're going to pay money into your business, right?
Yeah, it's unhelpful.
And it's a more tangible related reason, because then you can do more of the things that actually help convert people rather than just attract people, because attracting people is quite easy nowadays, right? Let's be honest, it is.
Yeah. It's very easy. I think though the other thing specifically for like the solopreneur audience and the freelancer audience is, I think all content it's really just like and LinkedIn especially, it's just networking on kind of steroids, right? It's that traditional networking on absolute steroids where every single day you're almost hosting like your own mini
I would say your mini town hall, right? If you want to.
Yeah, mini town hall of your absolute perfect buyers, right? And people that you want to do business with, right? And again, that mini town hall is not just you posting content yourself on your own profile. It's you engaging with other people's content, going in the comment section, adding insightful things that that are relevant to that post and to that author. So I think it's that, but I think building an audience and building this kind of goodwill in your industry, in your
community,
whatever, whatever buzzword you want to put around it. I think it's a safety net, right? Like, in business shit happens, right? And I think by building, sharing content, sharing your expertise daily and engaging with other people's content and, building that kind of building yourself as an expert around a topic and establishing yourself as that individual, it means that if anything does happen to this source of income, this source of revenue, well, you've then still built a base where, me personally, I'm never going to be worried now of, well, if Sway,
God forbid, right?
Goes to shit, goes to shit, whatever. It means that I'm not worried personally, because I know that, because of the content that I've been putting out for years now at this point, right, that there's going to be, job offers on the table. There's going to be, there's a lot of opportunities that I've created for myself because of the fact that I've just over time added that value, again, bit of a buzzword, but put out content, and I've established myself as a person in my industry, right? So I think it's also that like very real safety net thing, and I think it's one of the best things that all freelancers can do for their own career.
I think it's not just about the value, right? And I hate using buzzwords, and that's why I'm moving away from it. I think it's actually about creating meaningful relationships with people who expecting nothing from them, but if the worst happened, they could, right? And a very quick example on commenting on other people's posts. I'll give you a very quick story for the audience a second, hopefully yours as well. I mean, the reason why we're here today is because of a comment, right? And we can, I'll hand over to you in a moment to explain more about that story if you wish. But for me, there's a couple of ways that honest feedback can go on LinkedIn, right? And I have examples of both, right? I'll use the good example, and I'm sure you can fill in the blanks, those listening, on the bad example. But a couple of days ago, I very quickly gave some constructive criticism on a video that was deliberately designed to basically build someone's email list. Nothing against it, personally not something I do, but nothing against it, right? That's the game. It is what it is, right? And I said, look, great video, love the point you're trying to make. Problem is, you position the problem, you don't give me enough of the solution for me to care to then subscribe for the training, right? And he connected with me afterwards, and he dropped me a message, and he said, look, really, really appreciate the comment, and I've just re-edited one of the videos due to go out, and I've put more of the solution in because of the comment, right? And this is some of the transformative kind of relationship build you can do when it comes to that. Because if I had just gone, oh, that's amazing, oh, that's great, does that help someone? Yes, it strokes their ego, yes, it makes them feel good, etc. But it doesn't necessarily, and that's why I think being authentic to, and I hate, again, authenticity is a buzzword as well, but I think being authentic to you and sometimes going on the risk of potentially upsetting someone by saying, actually, I get what you're trying to do, but I feel you missed a mark here, it can be risky, but also can be the reason why you build a good relationship with someone and or not, right? Because again, we're trying to work out, do we want to work with this person or not?
And I'd say, if we're talking about, if it was a comment that you left on a post, I've done this numerous times where I've maybe disagreed with, what the poster was saying, or just added my own opinion, right, and explained why and gave quite a lot of context. When I tend to comment on things, I tend to give it tends to be quite a hefty paragraph because I'm like, explaining my thoughts, etc. I've had numerous examples where I've done that, and not even it might not be that the author of the post came back to me or, engaged, but then I've had 5 followers that have seen that comment on the post, have seen what I've put, they wanted to engage. And then it's actually led to a conversation, a sales conversation, because they've seen what I've wrote on someone else's post and have just found it insightful and found it, a different take on what that person was saying. So I think it works in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, and I think also being, I guess, candid or being aware and having the confidence within yourself to say, look, I know what you're trying to do here, but this is how I would have done it. Hopefully this is valuable. If it's not, all good, all the love to you. But hopefully this is valuable. And I think, as I say, sometimes we are so, and that's what I was alluding to when it came to like controversial views. Sometimes we're so close to, oh my God, what if this pisses someone off? Oh, I better not comment because it might piss them off. Or, oh my God, what if they, etc., right? And it's the same when it comes to, I'm sure you've had it as well, right? What if I get a hate comment on a video? And it's like, well, okay, but why are we giving that comment that power, number one? Number two, where does the intention come from? That's, I think, the question you should ask yourself, right? Because I think that's what matters. If the intention from your view, and it might be wrong, right? You might have missed the mark a couple of times or whatever, right? But if the person you wrote a comment on is upset about your comment, and that leads on to a conversation where you can then enhance your view because maybe you missed context or maybe you weren't aware of a specific program or whatever, then surely that's a benefit to you, as you were alluding to earlier about not just attaching leads and generational terms to, or these metrics to our content. And I think it goes deeper, because I think the reason, in a nutshell, why people choose to work with people is because they synergize with the person and their ideology, and to an extent what they do and how they do it and the solution we provide, right? So it's this quote unquote warming process we talk about in marketing. But one of the reasons why videos are powerful at it, in my view, is because you can scale it, right? So we can have a conversation now, and we've investing this hour to have this conversation, but within this conversation we're going to able to warm a percentage of our audiences up to the idea of working with us potentially, or at least position ourselves in that way, right? And I think people who are questioning video right now, I think that would be the thing I would get them to think about, which is how else are you going to do that passively? Because that's what happens when you post consistently. It's not kind of, hey, do you have a minute? Hey, can I? It's not that. It's, oh, Cotton's here. Oh, cool, Cotton's here. Oh, cool. Because as long as you're adding quote unquote value, again, hate to wear the buzzword, but as long as you're adding value or being a solution to the person's problem that you synergize with and you actually help fix, they will consume your content. It's not spamming necessarily. And this is one of the hurdles I had when it came to I'm going to post daily, which was, what if I spam people, right?
Yeah.
And the honest answer is you're not going to, as long as you're adding value. The reason why we call it spam is because it's useless, right? It's not useful to us. Now, use is subjective, sure, but you can target who you fix, right? You can target the problems that you help, create solutions for, right? I mean, how would you tackle someone who is maybe listening to this and is inspired? Okay, great, lads. Yeah, gonna do video, gonna do content. Where do we start?
Great question. It's a $1 million question. So for me, I think the most practical way to begin with video is kind of like it's short form video, right? It's the easiest way to start packaging up and distributing, your insights across, right? If you want to start with, long form, mid form YouTube videos, right, you'll do one and then it will be very hard to stick with it, right? So for me, the most practical way for like 95% of people that are probably listening right now is just shipping, 2 to 3 short form videos a week, where, again, going back to what you were just saying, you're presenting solutions to people's problems. That's probably the most simplistic way to kind of describe it, right? And you're positioning yourself as someone that has been through what your clients have been through, and deeply understands the problems, right? I don't think content is, it's not in these videos, it's not necessarily always about giving like very tactical information about you should do XYZ and you'll get this outcome. It's more just kind of, again, voicing those challenges, voicing those things that people are struggling with, or voicing ways in which people are currently going about doing something, and just saying why this might not be a good idea, and just starting to kind of like, video is a really good way to kind of like unchain people's beliefs, right, and start to get them to think a little bit differently. I think that's the other thing. But going more tactical of like, how do you actually do this? I think the most practical way is sitting down, the start of every month, right? And there's lots of tools now that make this very easy to do, where you can just start, for example, a tool called riverside.fm, right? And you could either get someone else in your business to interview you, or just get someone externally to interview you around the topic, and just ask a series of questions, right? So you sit down for kind of 30-45 minutes, kind of like what we're doing right now, almost like a podcast format. And from that 30-45 minute conversation, you've then got, usually, if you've done it right, and you've asked the right questions, and you've asked enough questions throughout that session, you've probably got 10 or 15 short videos within that you can clip out, and that you can then turn into individual 10 or 15 individual posts that every week you can ship across LinkedIn. Now, just purely from like a time efficiency standpoint, and managing that, it's significantly easier than if you try to sit down every time and make an individual video that you script out. You sit there, it's just and I think for most founders that are listening, or solopreneurs, freelancers, I'd urge them to follow that process, at least initially, because it's going to be the highest ROI for your time. And it's probably going to achieve the same output as it would if you were, you're trying to sit there and start and record a new video every single time, right? So from a kind of process, what do you do? That's the approach I take. Almost like, I call it like the fake podcast interview, where the goal is to sit down for 30 to 45 minutes and get a month's worth of short video content that you can ship across.
Yeah, I mean, you could also do that strategy very simply with just opening a Zoom room and then having a set of questions that you answer with breaks in between, right? The same is technically true, right? Just giving a very quick perspective change if you don't want to do it that way, right? The crux, right, is just start, though, I think is the key. Because if you don't, then you're never going to have what we would call the shit ones, right? Because everyone who's good at video, everyone who's got a personality on camera, everyone who's done camera, everyone who's been on a podcast, everyone blah, 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 has done it a million times. That's why. It's not magic. It's a skill, right? Anything else is a skill, right? It takes time to develop, right? And I think something which a lot of people don't focus on is the 1% improvements they could make if they just set a habit to do, I'm going to create a video, right? So one of the things I teach, one of the things I talk about to people starting out is create 5 videos talking about whatever you like, then create 5 videos being a solution, and then post the second 5 to get feedback, and then take that feedback on board and then continue to move that ball forward, right? And then when you've done that for 6 months, then probably a good idea to talk about how do you optimize it, how can you create longer form, why you should start scripting, all these other things, right? Should you have a podcast, etc., etc. Because at the beginning, to be honest, it doesn't matter. And it's not because you shouldn't have those things. It's because you're not going to be good enough at articulation for it to matter. And also you don't have viewership. So the reality is it's going to be you and your dog and maybe your mum who's going to see the video in the first place, right? Now, that comes back to an extent what we talked about at the beginning, which is how do you package it? What is your title? What's your thumbnail? Blah, blah, blah. What's your SEO on it? Etc. That will help, sure. But this ball needs to start rolling somehow, right? And I think sometimes we're so overwhelmed or so concerned about others' views on our videos or other views on our content that it kind of puts us into this false sense of security where we don't do it. And, it's okay, I'll write a post this week and I'll do it next week. The same could be true in anything else in your life, regarding fitness, etc., etc. What if I fail, right? It's the fear of failure. But the thing I would say is if you set the concept of I'm going to show up, you can't necessarily fail at the beginning, right? Because then you can't fail, right? Because you're just going to show up. Okay, cool, you showed up, you won, congratulations. But for those who, really took value from this conversation, really took value from, the insights you gave, and thank you for those, where can people connect with you? Where's best people to reach out, etc.?
Yeah, so I think LinkedIn would be the first one. I say the website, but get to know me more on LinkedIn first. If you resonate with what I'm saying, if my content doesn't piss you off, then
fantastic. We're on to a winner. And and I think thanks so much for the time, but I think there's so much value in what we discussed, and I think video can be very overwhelming, but it doesn't necessarily have to be if you like anything, if you take it into bite-sized chunks, right? And just as an ending thought, if you were going to give advice to someone who's either starting out with video or starting out with updating their marketing in 2024, what advice would you give them?
Do it in the most simple, low-cost way when you're just starting out. Very quickly going back to what you were just saying there, I think it's so important. You've got to accept that the first probably 3 to 6 months of your video program, it's gonna slightly suck, right? It's not gonna be great. There's gonna be problems. You're not gonna be great in front of a camera. So it's honestly almost probably in most cases absolutely pointless. Trying to invest too much in fancy equipment, in too much preparation for the videos. It's just like remove all the friction, right? And just keep it as stupid simple as you can, right? So that means recording with your phone, right? Maybe, using a cheap mic, maybe for the first few videos, not even using a mic, just using the mic that comes from your phone, right? And just remove the friction, keep it simple.
In fact, how simple we made this episode was our friend here is using his iPhone as his webcam. Exactly. So there we go. That's awesome. Thank you ever so much for joining me, ladies and gents. If you did take value from this episode and do not want to miss next week, why not be subscribed? You can always take it back if the content is not for you at a later date. Thank you ever so much for the support on the channel, and I'll see you very, very soon.